There is a must-see documentary tonight on the Fifth Estate about police pressure and the witnesses to a murder who say they were compelled to change their story until an innocent man went to prison. Linden MacIntyre tonight takes you inside the interrogation room, and here's some of what you'll see.
And I think you can tell me whether or not he was standing beside you.
He wasn't standing beside me.
Okay.
The only choice that I thought that was available to me was to tell the police exactly what they wanted to hear so that I could leave that interrogation room, go home, and continue my life. And that's the only choice they left me with.
That is a clip from the documentary, The Interrogation Room. Linden MacIntyre, the reporter you will hear again tonight, and Linden, the reporter you will hear with me this morning. And it's a pleasure to see you and to hear from you on this. You are going to introduce us in your documentary tonight to a Mississauga man by the name of Eric Morgan. Just set him up briefly to understand.
Yeah, Eric was from Brampton, out near Mississauga, and he was a guy who promoted concerts. He had a bit of, run-ins with the law, as a lot of people do. Nothing major. Usually, for pot or something like that. And anyway, he's a very peaceful, gentle, tiny little skinny guy who suddenly is being busted for murder 4 years after the event. And the problem the police had was they had no evidence. And he had a pretty solid alibi, six or seven witnesses who were with him when the murder happened someplace else. And you just saw one of these witnesses, an absolutely solid guy, articulate and smart and convinced, and what you will see is how police use tactics to break these witnesses down.
They had no evidence, but they wanted to get some from interrogation techniques.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, they wanted to turn the alibi witnesses around into prosecution witnesses, or completely knock them out of the game.
Okay, so let's play a little bit more tape to hear how they did that. Here's some tape of interrogation techniques. Listen to this.
You're using a psychological game.
No, this is not psychological. This is common sense.
No, you got to get me to talk.
No, because you're
bullying me.
No.
This is, you're bullying. You are.
Bully?
You're bullying me down.
You're a grown man. I'm a grown man.
No, you're bullying me down. You're using your authority to bully me down.
Look at that. I mean, he calls them on it. You are bullying me. That's extraordinary.
You got to remember, this guy is not a suspect. He is a witness. He is an alibi witness for the suspect. And they break him down. Best friend, absolutely convinced he was with the suspect when the murder happened someplace else, and after 8.5 hours, they completely turn him inside out.
So, and that is just one of the things that one of the witnesses, what else did they do? Because they didn't, in the end, secure a conviction.
No, well, because the problem is that these tactics were so off the wall. And they're a complete perversion of fairly normal police interrogation tactics. And they were so far off the wall that when this thing finally, 3.5 years after this guy was first locked up, it finally gets into the court. After a few days, what happens is the judge, the prosecution, and the defense, I'm giving away the story, but it was so egregious that all the elements in it instructed the jury to go away for a couple of minutes and get back here and exonerate this guy.
Because it could have led to the kinds of things that we have heard so many times, wrongful conviction.
It was hanging right on the thread, and he had to make a choice. They offered him a deal the day before, and they said, look, you plead guilty to manslaughter and you can go home because you've been in jail for 3.5 years. And he had to sit overnight and decide what he was going to do.
So this is a handful of officers behaving badly, if we can couch it in that phrase. But what do we learn from it more broadly in terms of overall police interrogation techniques? We
learned that, there's a tendency of police officers to develop what they call a gut instinct. And when they do, there's a tendency of some police officers to go down the tunnel and to organize everything for a predetermined outcome. This is a really extreme example of that. And I think what we take away from it, and I hope police officers will take away from it, is that when this becomes systemic, as it seems to have become in Peel Region, in their homicide squad, when this becomes systemic, it becomes extremely dangerous. This police service had a high, almost 100% record of closing murder files. This case makes you wonder how many of those files were appropriately closed, and how many people are there in the prison system who shouldn't be there because the game was stacked against them by these kinds of tactics.
Those are precisely the kinds of questions that Linden MacIntyre has been asking for, well, 24 years now. The Interrogation Room is the final documentary you will see from Linden because he's bringing his glorious career to an end with this one. I don't know how many gajillions of interviews and pieces of paper and research you have read and how many awards you have won as a result of your work, but can you spare a minute to look back with me? Of what are you
As long as you don't embarrass me.
I will not. I just want to give you a chance to reflect on of what you're most proud.
Well, I'm awfully proud of the International Emmy we won back in the early 90s for exposing a propaganda campaign in the United States that moved that whole country into a war that the people really weren't interested in doing. Lies were told, congressional process was perverted, and the country went off to a war. And we were lucky enough to find evidence of the lie and find the principal liar and put it on TV.
It was extraordinary, and it had a huge impact in the United
States. It had a huge impact.
So many of your stories on wrongful convictions, too.
We did a lot of stories. I suppose the daddy of them all was the Stephen Truscott case. He had been living under a life sentence for murder for decades. He was living under another name, and we discovered him. We spent several years investigating his case, persuading him, Stephen, you do not have to spend the rest of your life in the shadows. Come on out. And when he did, the justice system took a hard look at that and said, this is ridiculous. And they revisited it, and Stephen Truscott is now Stephen Truscott, and his name is clear.
I don't know how many young people you inspired to pursue a career in investigative journalism.
Heather, it's the Fifth Estate and it's the CBC that creates the environment in which this work gets done.
Of course, but for 24 years you were a cornerstone of it, and you have had a career of consequence, and we are all better for it. Thank you. We'll look forward to tonight's installment. Thanks a lot, Linden.
Thanks, Heather.
The Interrogation Room from Linden MacIntyre tonight on CBC Television, 9 p.m., 9:30 in Newfoundland. Don't miss it.